The Templeton Twins by Ellis Weiner. Please turn to page 38 and 39 for Chapter 3. When you hear the bell, be sure to go to the top of the next page to continue reading along. Let's begin. Chapter 3. The Templeton Twins ask a question. When Professor Templeton emerged from his study late that afternoon, he was deep in thought, as usual. For this reason, he failed to notice certain unusual things the twins had done while they were making dinner. You heard me? They were making dinner. They sometimes did this, and it was no big deal to any of the Templetons. How could two 12-year-olds do such a thing? Oh, please! They boiled water for spaghetti and heated up a jar of pasta sauce and chopped a head of lettuce into hunks and poured bottled salad dressing on it. As far as they all concerned, this was a splendid dinner, and they had it all the time. The professor did not notice that the dining room table had been moved a little, and that his place had been set opposite where he usually sat. He would not have been bothered by any of these arrangements had he been aware of them, but he wasn't. Instead, he greeted the twins in a distracted way, checked the day's mail, washed his hands, and sat down at the table. In the kitchen, John spooned some spaghetti onto a plate, topped it with sauce, and placed some of the lettuce beside it. Then, pretending to be extremely casual and ordinary about everything, Abigail carried the plate out into the dining room and placed it before her father. "Thank you, dear. It looks lovely," the professor said, his mind elsewhere. By this, I do not mean that the poor man's brain had been removed from his head and taken to a different location, but that he wasn't thinking about spaghetti and salad. He was thinking about other things. In fact, about an article he was reading. You will be interested to learn that the professor used one of his own inventions to read magazines and journals while eating. He called this invention the foot-activated compressed air power page turner with clip-on mount. This, as you can see, is a perfectly dreadful name, so we'll refer to the invention as FACAPPTWCOM. He originally created this device for people who played the piano. It consists of a pedal on the floor connected to a rubber hose. When you stepped on the pedal, a blast of air shot through the hose into a nozzle clipped on the sheet of music you were reading. The blast of air turned the page. You laugh, but turning the page is an important function for piano players who read music while they're playing and who cannot lift their hands from the keys. How important is this function? It is so important that a serious piano performance, an entire human being is employed to turn the pages. I know you think I'm making this up, but I assure you it is true. Ask your parent, guardian, clergyman, sports coach, or piano teacher whether or not it's true. Or don't bother with any of them and just take my word for it. The FACAPPTWCOM was meant to allow piano players to turn their own pages. And it worked, more or less. Sometimes the jet of air turned more than one page, which meant the device needed fine-tuning, but still. Then the professor discovered that it could also turn the pages of books and magazines, thus enabling him to eat and read at the same time without interrupting either the eating or the reading. He had not yet perfected the device, so it was not for sale anywhere, but he had high hopes for its success in both the piano playing world and the reading while eating world. While the professor was reading and eating, Abigail stood there, holding her breath and sneaking glances toward the ceiling. Then she heard a sort of hissing sound and looked around. It was John, whispering from the kitchen, "Abby, help!" Abigail ran into the kitchen. There was her brother, holding the fishing pole. Its line ran up and across the ceiling, crossing above the kitchen light fixture, which held it up, then ran down through the kitchen doorway, out into the dining room, and across the dining room light fixture. It ended, finally, in the hook and sinker attachment, which dangled high above Professor Templeton's plate. John pointed to the kitchen ceiling. "It's stuck!" Abigail looked. The fishing line, which John was trying to unreel, had snagged on something in the ceiling lamp. Abigail said, "Oh, for goodness sakes," and immediately placed her hand on the counter and jumped up onto it. From her perch, Abigail could see the problem. She gave the line a little jerk, and it jumped free of its snag and grew taut. John quickly reeled it in little to keep it under control. Abigail jumped down. "Okay," she said, "let's go." Take a second to look at the pictures. She dashed back out into the dining room just in time to hear her father, his eyes on his magazine, say, "Aren't you eating, children?" And then he stopped. He realized that a photograph of a dog was descending from the ceiling directly above his plate. In fact, the dog, a bright white animal with a long pointed snout, small, flopped over triangular ears, and lively dark eyes, was staring right at him. "My goodness," he said. "Papa," Abigail said. She was tense and slightly hunched over, and was making the kind of ultra careful, hold your breath face you make when you're walking across a frozen pond and you hope the ice won't break beneath you. Help me read it. "Can we get this dog?" The professor stared at the photograph. "Not this very dog," Abigail said quickly, "but this type of dog. Please." "Please, Papa," John called in from the kitchen. And then, as though awakening from a dream, the professor looked around and noticed the position of the table, which the twins had changed so that their father's plate at dinner would be exactly under the light fixture. He turned and saw how the fishing line went back into the kitchen. "How very clever," he murmured. "So can we, please?" Abigail said. "We'll take care of it and walk it and everything." "Oh, I don't know, Abby," the professor said. "A new dog? It's such a change." "But isn't that what we need?" Abigail said. The professor looked at her and at the dangling photograph of the dog, which seemed to look back at him. Then he put his fork down and thought about it. Questions for review. Number 1. The FACAPPTWCOM works by blowing air at a book, magazine, or sheet music to turn a page. Would it work underwater? Why or why not? Number 2. When was the last time you played the piano underwater? Write your answer here. Number 3. Why is it a good idea to call something that sinks a sinker? Write your answer in the form of a brief opera. This is the end of Chapter 3.